This story is about Howard Beale, who was the network news anchorman on UBS TV. In his time, Howard Beale had been a mandarin of television, the grand old man of news with a hot rating of 16 and a 28 audience share. In 1969, however, his fortunes began to decline. He fell to a 22 share. The following year, his wife died, and he was left a childless widower with an 8 rating and a 12 share. He became morose and isolated, began to drink heavily, and on September 22nd, 1975, he was fired, effective in 2 weeks.
Okay, retro
Hello and welcome. Welcome and hello. This is Wait, You Haven't Seen? It's a show where we talk about movies, and specifically, we talk about a movie at least one of us has never seen before. I'm your host, Travis, aka TV's Travis. This is episode number 311. And our movie this week from 1976 is Network. And here to talk with me about it, it's Josiah Pitchforth. Josiah, how you doing?
I'm good, man. How you doing?
I am good, and it's Pitchforth. I just realized I had it in my head right up until I actually said your name, Josiah Pitchforth.
Actually, Pitchforth is an alternate spelling, so technically you're not entirely off the mark.
That was close.
Yeah.
All right, so Network, 1976's Network. I had never seen this before. This was my first time watching. But what is your history with this movie?
I think I was trying to remember when I first saw it. It was probably high school, around adolescence.
Okay.
I was young film geek, so kind of wanted to really indulge in all that like rich 70s cinema. And it's funny too because my first impressions of the movie and my latest impressions are a little bit different in some key points. But it was. It's funny. It's a movie that I think it's really curious. The director who kind of took the helm on it, Sidney Lumet. He's self-professed like not a comedy guy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very much a comedic script written by Patty Chayefsky. So you kind of have this stark drama of like real absurdity, and so it always kind of resonated with me as like I like movies that are a little off kilter and like tonally viable.
Yep, absolutely. So this isn't the first Sidney Lumet movie that I've done. I did talk about 12 Angry Men within the last year, I think. I saw that for the first time, and 12 Angry Men was one of those movies that you always hear about how good it is. And this far along, the only thing I can think of is I'm probably going to enjoy this, but there's no way it can live up to the hype. And it was better than the hype had given it. And Network is the same way. I always heard about Network. And this was one, when I'd look back at like Academy Award lists and I'd see Network was nominated for a whole bunch, because this was nominated Academy Awards wise for Best Picture, Best Actor twice, Best Leading Actress, Supporting Actor and Actress, and Screenplay. And I think some other ones like either set design or editing or something. But I would always see, it was nominated, but it didn't win. And I'd seen Rocky, I had seen All the President's Men, I had seen Taxi Driver, and then the other one that was nominated that year was Bound for Glory. So I'm like, well, of course it didn't win. It's up against Rocky, All the President's Men, and Taxi Driver. Like, how do when the worst of those five, in my opinion, just looking at them, is Bound for Glory, which is not a bad movie. Like, that's pretty good.
Great year in cinema.
Yeah. And then I watched this and wow. Like, number one, I didn't really know what to expect. All I knew about Network truly going into it was I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore. That was it. That was like what I knew about this movie. So I was prepared for the drama end of things, but I didn't realize how absurd and satirical it really was. So that was surprising to me, but it was a welcome surprise for sure. Because like it jumps right out
it's
of the
kind of a very generic name too, where it's like network. It's like,
yeah.
oh, this could be just like a network drama kind of behind the scenes kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and it just doesn't set you up for kind of what to expect
Yeah. Yeah.
at all. If you've seen the clip, you see the clip of I'm mad as hell, and he's just it's Howard the character is freaking out, but that's all you know. I thought going into this that was kind of the climax of the movie. That was the end of it. That was where we were building to.
Yeah. Exactly.
And no, it's very, very important to the movie, but it's halfway through is when he has this
Yeah.
moment, and he keeps going
the
after
catalyst.
that. Peter
Yeah.
Finch plays Howard. So this movie comes out in 1976. Okay, directed by Sidney Lumet, as we mentioned. Written by you mentioned the writer
Oh,
Patty
Patty Chayefsky. Yeah.
Chayefsky. Yep. So it starred Peter Finch as Howard Beale. Faye Dunaway is Diana Christensen. William Holden is Max Schumacher. Robert Duvall. Ned Beatty's in here for a few minutes.
And killed it. Yeah.
And also, what was her name? I wrote it down.
Oh yeah, she the supporting actress
Yes.
there, his wife.
Max's
I've
wife.
seen her in a couple things. Did you catch the Lance Hendrickson 15-second cameo?
I did. So I actually took a screen capture of it and posted it today on my social networks, my social media, because I was like, that's a baby Lance Hendrickson. You're not sneaking that face past me. I could pick him out of a lineup. That was great. But Peter Finch, now I'm not super familiar with him. I've seen William Holden in a lot of stuff. Like I loved him in Sunset Boulevard, which is another of those movies where you always heard about it. And it outdid the hype with Sunset Boulevard for me. But I'd seen William Holden in that and some other stuff. Faye Dunaway I've always liked. But I wasn't as familiar with Peter Finch. I didn't know until after I finished watching this he was Australian. And he almost didn't get the role because Sidney Lumet he was afraid that like his accent wouldn't be right. And so he sent a recording of himself doing like a newscaster American accent. Because he wanted the role.
And he nailed it. Yeah.
So good. Sadly, I did also learn that he passed away before the Academy Awards that year. So he was the first.
Oh, wow.
He was the first person to win the award posthumously.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's wow.
And as far as acting awards go, this was what it won the Academy Awards for. It won because he and William Holden were up for Best Actor. Peter Finch won, which is surprising to me. Usually, you would think if there were two actors from the same movie up for that same award, it would kind of split the vote, and it would go somewhere else. But again, how's this for your Best Actor in a Leading Role nominees? All right, this is Peter Finch, William Holden for Network, Robert De Niro for Taxi Driver, Sylvester Stallone for Rocky, and Giancarlo Giannini for Seven Beauties. That's
a stiff competition.
Yeah. Ned Beatty was nominated for his 5.5 or 6 minutes of screen time, which we're going to get to that because that was some amazing stuff. He lost out to Jason Robards from All the President's Men. Okay. All the President's Men is one of my favorite movies, period.
Yeah.
And Robards was amazing in it. But Faye Dunaway won Best Actress in a Leading Role, and Beatrice Straight won for Best Actress in a Supporting Role for 5 minutes and 40 seconds of screen time. Which
I think is a testament to the screenplay, really. I mean, they were both given like these amazing scenes.
Yeah. It's astounding. So one of the things is, and I played it at the top of the show, we opened up with like this voiceover over top of like a quad, a 4-split screen of news broadcasts. One of, you got Walter Cronkite over here and all these newscasters. It's the 4 networks. It's ABC, NBC, CBS, and UBS, our fictional 4th major network. And that voiceover, which voiceover in movie can be very hit or miss, right? Like it can work, it can not work. In the case of, a good noir detective story, you almost need that. But sometimes the most famous example where I don't think it works is the Blade Runner version
Yeah.
You're the same page? Okay. Because I know some people actually like that. That's the first version of Blade Runner I ever saw. But
okay.
But after watching, other cuts, I realized no, it just doesn't fit the tone of what the movie really could be.
Yeah. To me, I think the voiceover for Network, I feel like Padachevsky wrote it just for that punchline in the end, which I don't know if spoilers or whatever, but the last line in that movie is like, it's a gut punch, it's a joke, it's satirical, but after everything the audience has gone through, like, you're not really going to get a chuckle out of it. But yeah,
it's true. What does it say that it got a chuckle out of me then? Am I a terrible person? Because it definitely did. We'll get there.
I'll be honest, I did laugh a little. Yeah.
Yeah. There is no restraint on spoilers. If you're listening to this show and you really care, you're going to get spoiled for a movie. But this movie is almost 50 years old now. You've had plenty of time.
Yeah.
But it opens up with that voiceover. I did find this interesting in my researching of kind of behind the scenes stuff. After watching it for the first time, I did read that Sidney wanted a stylistic choice of starting the movie off very documentary style and available lighting. And then as the movie progressed, there were more and more moving camera shots, less locked off, and more stylized, slick-looking lighting to give it this progression from gritty documentary to slick production by the end.
Yeah.
And it's something that, as I'm reading about that, I was like, it did do that. And I didn't even notice it. It was nice and subtle all the way through. The changes were really from start to finish.
And it's interesting to know,
I love that
too, that it was shot, as far as I can tell, entirely on location. So no studio sets. So you're really in those kind of cramped offices of the newsroom and everything like that. And I think that, obviously lends an air of authenticity.
Absolutely. And I got to think, for an actor, that's got to be both difficult because you're not used to working in that kind of a condition, but also helpful to get yourself in the headspace as well. Because it was all New York, except I did read that the control room and the sets of the show and the news set were in Toronto. And the only reason they had to film those there was there were no stations in New York that could give them enough time to shoot on their sets. They needed their news sets. I love that newsroom set though, with the clocks in the back and how it's got the wall.
Yeah. Isn't that wild? Yeah.
That wall that pops open, so they come onto set from back there, and the wood paneling. Oh, so good.
Yeah,
I
very
absolutely
70s.
adored that.
Yeah.
I did notice, early on, our first news broadcast, we get, so the opening of the movie is that voiceover, but then we get Max and Howard on the street, right? Howard's been fired. He knows he's got 2 weeks left, so they go out drinking. It was just great. It's just wonderful, camaraderie. They're hammered walking down the street telling old war
story that he does throughout the movie. Yeah.
That was great. When that came up later, I was like, oh, this dude's got one story and he's going to tell that story.
It's sad. Yeah.
But Matt, to have it be the jovial, friendly, telling the story big, loud, and boisterous, and then smash cut to they're just sitting at the bar. And it's dead silent.
Yeah.
They're the only ones there.
Time.
It's closing down. Howard's asleep on the bar. And he has nothing. Howard at this point in the movie, we've already been told his marriage, he's a widower. He has no kids. Now he has no job. He's just got nothing. And he offhandedly makes the drunken comment that he's going to off himself on air. And Max probably doesn't really believe him. And so he's like, dude, you'd get a great rating if you did that. And sure enough, the next day on his broadcast, he starts talking about that. And I loved it because nobody in that control room, save the one person, is listening to him at all.
Yeah.
Which I haven't done a lot of live news television production. Because our local station, my mom actually worked for a local TV station when I was a kid for a little while. But that station didn't have a live daily news broadcast for local news. So I had been in the control room, but it was always like just basically an affiliate station rebroadcasting. There was occasionally a local news thing, but is that fairly typical? Like, they should be paying attention to what's going on, right?
Well, it's funny because Sidney Lumet got his start in TV, live TV.
Okay.
That's where he kind of, made his career. And, so he swears by, the accuracy and authenticity, of those behind the scenes stuff. And, it's different experiences for everyone. But what's interesting is that, that's how he met Patty Chayefsky, is that he was directing an episode of Danger, which was like an anthology thriller series.
Okay.
And, Patty Chayefsky submitted him some scripts. And so that's kind of how those two intertwined. I think if that hadn't happened, and if network landed in the hands of another director, maybe someone that was like more associated with comedy or more versed and experienced with comedy, I think we would be looking at a completely different movie.
Oh, for sure.
For better or worse. But one thing that was pretty clear to me is that, Sidney Lumet definitely had a vision and a commitment to that vision of like, how news media is run. It's interesting. There's a scene where like all the producers are like gathered in their conference room and they're just breaking down the events of the world in like just 45 seconds here, 15 seconds there, a minute 15 there, whatever. And that is what producers do. And it does become a routine. But I think, having a little bit of experience in a peripheral sense of the bullpen or, a newsroom is that, these producers do care about the stories.
Mm-hmm.
I think the kind of cynical portrayal that we saw in that producers conference room and the fact that there's that lack of paying attention in the booth. I think that's, it's to serve the more cynical themes of like television and this like, entity in society that, has all this power and is not always responsible with it. But I from my own experiences, that's not entirely the case, but it makes for an entertaining movie.
It's a very entertaining scene. And a couple of faces I recognized in that scene were the one character, Harry Hunter, who comes back a couple of times, played by Jordan Charney. I recognized him immediately because he has a brief role in the first Ghostbusters film. And
oh, really?
He's Dean Yeager at New York University who fires Bill Murray.
That's funny.
And so I saw him and I'm like, wow, he gray his hair up a little bit for like whatever, 8 years later, and it's Dean Yeager. Like I just recognized him right away. And then the director, who this is like his only acting credit, it's a man named Bill Burroughs, played the TV director. Looked to me like an American version of Stephen Fry. It's all I could think of the whole time was Stephen Fry. So that just kind of got me. But like that whole scene is just great because they're all doing their thing. They're having their conversation. And here's Howard on air saying, in 2 weeks on my last broadcast, I'm going to end it right here on the air. And meanwhile, the script lady is listening to this and she's like losing it. She's like,
the only one paying attention. Yeah.
She's looking over the notes. She's like, wait a minute, I don't have this written down. And someone else comes in like, what the hell is going on out there? And then they're all paying attention. So it was,
and it was clever too, because you really had to make those scenes plausible for the audience to accept the premise that like this guy keeps going on air and he's getting loonier and loonier. So it's funny too because you mentioned that year 76 in cinema being up against Taxi Driver at the Academy Awards, and you have like these two very iconic movies that deal with like this descent into madness, Travis Bickle and Howard Beale, and they're totally different portrayals, but of course they both end in a violent demise, but it makes you think about like that time and in the 70s of like what was going on culturally, that like these movies were just really hitting the zeitgeist,
Yeah. Yeah, and like this movie in particular was very prophetic in sort of because UBS is a fourth network, based in New York City, and at the time we didn't have a fourth network. We had CBS, NBC, ABC, but a fourth network did come along, and it was Fox. Fox eventually came along in the mid to late '80s, and not only did Fox come along, but like at one point, Diana in this is having her pitch meeting, and she's talking to her people, and they're going, she's got this idea for a show, right? Her show of the week thing, where
Right.
they see she sits in on seeing some footage of an actual bank robbery that this group, what was it, the Ecumenical
It's the
Liberation Army?
ecumenical liberation. Yeah. And it's like a blatant nod to Patty Hearst,
Yep, absolutely. But she sees that, and so she wants to take that and create a show around it. And it's like Fox was the one, and she talks about counterculture and anti-establishment programming, and like that was what Fox did to start. That was their whole thing. Like the sitcoms on the air.
Splash.
Yeah, because I mean the sitcoms on the air in the mid to late '80s were these really family friendly shows, the Cosby Show and things like that. And along comes Fox, and they're like, well, we can't just do the same thing because nobody's going to watch it. They're already watching this stuff on the other networks. So they come up with Married with Children. They get the Tracy Ullman show, and you sort of are born from there. So it was kind of really interesting that 10-ish years earlier, this movie comes out with basically all that laid out.
Yeah. Laid the groundwork, or yeah.
And not only that, but just the way. So that's the other thing. I think if you're watching this movie for the first time in 2025, it's hard to understand the power that network TV had back then.
Right. Because 60 million viewership. It's like,
it's what you had, right? So Howard has his first snap, and they take him off the air immediately. Because it's Max, and it is, who is it? The other department heads, Ruddy.
Oh, Robert Duvall's character, and
Robert Duvall's character. And they're just like, nope, get him off the air. Like that's it.
Oh, and Ruddy, the original CEO there.
Yeah, and like, but Max and all the old school news guys are like, we ain't dealing with this. And it's Diana, and she convinces Frank, because Frank Hackett he doesn't care about news. He cares about money.
Ratings, yeah. Oh, yeah, money, yeah.
He's about the money, and ratings equal money. Diana is all about ratings.
Right.
And so they end up convincing them to let Howard go back on the air. And he does. And it just, like, every time Howard goes on the air, it just gets more and more ridiculous, because he is no longer doing the standard news broadcasts anymore. Now he's ranting and raving. And I captured audio, and I want to play this one because this was from Diana. And it's just really interesting to me that this is almost 50 years ago, mind you.
Yeah.
Where she talks about how Howard...
He's articulating the popular rage.
He's articulating the popular rage.
Right. Which is like such a catchphrase, and yeah.
It really is.
And
oh boy. Did this movie give us whether it's right or left wing, the politics of it doesn't matter. And in fact, she didn't even care at one point.
No.
She talked.
What's interesting too is that his rise to the level that the show gets, it's not a steady incline. It's he has failures and he has missteps, and it kind of, I think that kind of sporadic climb really adds to like the anxiety and the chaos of the movie.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. But he ends up going from just being on the news to like having this, months later or whatever, or a few weeks later, they give him this big platform production show. It's no longer about disseminating the news. It's about sensationalism and pandering to that popular rage, because he midway through the movie is when he has what is the one thing I knew about going into it, and the most famous probably quote from the movie.
Yeah.
So Howard is slipping. Howard is losing it. He has even like a moment, and I thought this was really interesting, where he has that moment laying in bed, where he hears the voice, but we don't hear it as an audience.
Yeah.
Talking to him and telling him, you got to go on the air, you got to do this thing, and the whole like, why me? And it's, you're on TV, dummy.
Yeah.
And
I wasn't sure watching that scene if we as the audience, I mean, it's kind of presented in a way that yes, he is losing his mind,
Mhm.
but it never like closes the door completely on the fact that maybe he is kind of imbued with some supernatural powers or whatever, some voice from the great beyond. I think it's fun to kind of like, oh, okay, and particularly since like the kind of the most unsettling aspect of Howard Beale's descent into madness is that he makes salient points throughout, till the end, and we as an audience kind of learned how those points are manipulated and formed, with his interactions with Ned Beatty's character, or his interactions with the ether alone in bed. But it's funny too that like that big iconic scene, everybody runs to the window, opens up, I'm as mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. And it's so dramatic with the thunder and the lightning, and it's pouring outside. So he gets people to, throw common sense to the wind and open their windows up in the middle of a rainstorm just to kind of, articulate this rage. And then, of course, the big punchline is like this battle cry of the unheard becomes an audience catchphrase that they say at the end of at the end of every show in unison. It's like it has such sardonic wit to it.
When that happens, so the first half of this movie is Howard. There's a lot of plot threads going on, but the first half is like Howard is going from failing news anchor to eventual crash that leads to his sort of rebirth as this bombastic, almost for a modern version of an Alex Jones type, where he's like not as conspiracy theory necessarily, although there is a bit of that going on, but this whole idea of like just rage-filled ranting that goes on. And that's the first half of the movie, coupled with Max dealing with the fact that he and a couple of the older news people are trying to hold on to this idea of journalism and impartiality,
and the responsibility of having a TV show and having this voice to so many people.
Yeah, and they're at odds with Frank Hackett, who just wants he's part of a conglomerate that's running the network, that owns it, that just wants the money end of it because he wants to bring the profits in, right? The news department is $38 million in debt every year or whatever.
When he laments, I'm a man without a corporation.
Yeah.
That's just like such a, that I think that sums up his character and the turmoil he would be feeling at that time.
But then you have like, so then Howard has his break and he has his I'm mad as hell, which also I loved the fact that Max's story that he tells repeatedly throughout the movie multiple times is about him as a young news anchor getting called in the middle of the night to have to go to the George Washington Bridge because they're working on that. He was supposed to do a remote out there. And it's his, so I jumped out of bed, threw my raincoat on over my pajamas, and ran out and hailed a cab and told him, take me to the middle of the George Washington Bridge. And the cabbie turned around and said, don't do it. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Which is the great punchline. But I love that that's mirrored by Howard wandering out in his pajamas and a raincoat in the rain. And that's when he has his low point. So I kind of liked how that was Max's like jumping off point to his career. And it's the bottom of Howard's career. It's the end for him.
And their friendship in that movie too. It seems like Max is the only one that really cares about Howard as a human being. And, at one point Howard's like, couch surfing on, in his apartment or whatever, because he's, going through all this. And everybody else sees Howard as like a product, and Howard sees himself as a prophet. and neither one of those perspectives really has the necessary compassion to save him,
Yeah.
And so it is kind of a tragic story in that sense. That I will say, there's an element to the movie that I feel like is out of place, but at the same time, like the craftsmanship of the filmmaking is just so meticulous and on point that like I can't really fault it. But I felt like the relationship that Max has with Diane and the his marriage falling apart, it was like that was like, you have this kind of stark drama, this very like, well written, well performed drama, but it's right smack dab in the middle of this really over the top, zany, satirical, movie.
Yeah.
And so there are times where like the juxtaposition were a little jolting, but I understood its place there, and obviously the best supporting actress, you can't cut that. How do you cut those scenes? They're just so good.
And the thing is, I think that works in a way because what it does is it gives us a reason to understand why Max is the one who looks at Howard as a human being. Because really, on the whole, there is no good guy, bad guy in this movie, right? There is no, nobody is really a hero. We have protagonists, being Max.
And we have people that present themselves as heroes, like, the Ecumenical Society or,
absolutely.
But yeah, it is a cynical movie in that sense where it's like, does heroism really exist in the universe of this movie? And who's to say?
Right, because there's no morality to anybody. They're just, Diana.
They all get corrupted.
Yeah, Diana as a character literally says in her dinner scene with Max, like, all I care about are ratings. That's it. She doesn't. She can't develop like good emotional connections but she is good at what she does in her job, and so she focuses on that. And Max does have that ability and that need for empathy and connection. And so normally, like a lot of times the trope is always you got the bad boy and the woman that tries to fix him. And we sort of put that on its head and go into the reverse, right? She's the bad boy and he is the family man who there's a part of him that knows they're never going to really have anything, but he feels like he's got to give it a shot. Like maybe he could.
I think that like what's seems to be like throughout the movie, or perhaps as a statement, is that these characters are weighed not necessarily by their morality, but their purity. I think that Diane is like purely herself. And it seems that like Max is a little bit conflicted about like who he is. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was having a hard time identifying with him, because he does contradict himself, in his relationship with Diane and his relationship with his wife, because when his wife asks him outright, like, do you love this woman that you're having an affair with? And, he's uncertain about that. And he doesn't quite know what his feelings are. But his big critique and his big knock on Diane is that she's incapable of feeling. She's raised by television, and she has like the line is like, you learned your life from Bugs Bunny or something like that. So his character is not as defined as like Howard's or Diane's or Hackett's. These. And I think that's what kind of makes him a little bit out of a place. But, in terms of like having a human connection, he and his wife are the closest, right?
Yeah. And then, so our mid-movie switchover, they do a really interesting thing, which is that the character of Ruddy, who we only saw briefly in the beginning of the movie, and then he was just sort of a name. He was the last sort of bastion of the old guard. He passes away. And so now Howard's got his big show, and they've got like a soothsayer on there, and it's
Mm-hmm.
instead of being in a newsroom, now it's this big stage production, and he's coming
It's
out
like a
with
game
the
show.
he's coming out with the stained glass window, and he's all fire and brimstone and yelling because the I'm Mad as Hell did so well, and got huge ratings. It got people talking. They're just leaning into that whole force. And this first one was great because it's Howard tearing down everything that they do in television
Mm-hmm.
news. He's even saying so much as like, we're not truth, we're a carnival show. We're just feeding
Yeah.
you what we want you to hear, and you're lapping
Which
it
of
up.
course makes the audience trust him more and
Yeah,
love him more.
exactly.
Even as he's crapping on the product that he's giving them.
Yeah, it's this movie is like a textbook in propaganda, and how powerful media manipulation can be, because here's Howard basically saying, look, everything that we do is not in your best interest at all. It's not about the truth. It's just about getting ratings and sensationalism and keeping your eyes glued to us. He even tells people repeatedly, stop watching. And that doesn't work.
Yeah,
They just
yeah,
watch
exactly.
more.
Yeah.
So it's really, really interesting, especially in today's world where you get it's fake news and you can't trust half the things you read because misinformation and disinformation gets peddled like reality. And here, this movie was talking about that 50 years ago.
And the irony, of course, is that he's telling people, turn off the TV, or he's exposing this deal with the Arab backers on the big conglomerate buy and everything like that. The irony, of course, is that well, I guess we'll just lead up to that scene, that fateful scene with Ned Beatty. Just like it's so well lit, and the best line, I always get a kick out of it when Ned Beatty, who's this big CEO foreboding type, is leading Howard Beale into his conference room. He says like, "Welcome to Valhalla," or something like that. It does have like this very like mythic, iconic arrangement in the lighting and the mise en scène.
Yeah, so we've only seen Ned Beatty because he basically becomes Ruddy. The character of Ruddy is dead, and Ned Beatty has sort of replaced him as he's now the top dog. He is the one that everybody answers to, Jensen. And after Howard I loved how Hackett and everybody were out in L.A. when Howard gives
on the 3-hour delay, where you're like, oh no, you feel that,
because like that's totally a thing that would happen back then. He wouldn't have seen it because it wouldn't have aired for 3 hours. So he's getting the phone calls of like, all hell is breaking loose. He's like, what are you talking about? I'm just watching it right now for the first time. And so he's got to go back, and Jensen wants to see Howard. And this is where I noticed that we'd flipped from more of a documentary style, that grittier look, to things were getting slick, because they walk into the conference room, Jensen closes the drapes and the lighting changes. And this scene is so masterfully put together. The cinematography, the lighting, the performances. Ned Beatty, I love that Ned Beatty had said he worked on this movie for one day. He worked on it for one day. He got an Academy Award nomination out of it. And he just kills this scene, because you have to have that perfect balance, because it is very satirical. Arthur Jensen is everything wrong with kind of the world, right? Like he looks at the world as a business and wants to run everything like a business. And the only thing that matters is currency and money. And this whole diatribe that he has, it's absolutely brilliant, start to finish.
Yeah, and he's not without his charm too. And I think the line, where the kind of button on that scene is like, there's this long conference table, and it's lined by these kind of like these Art Deco lamps that you'd find in a conference room. So it's like this. It's kind of like it's literally like an airstrip right to Ned Beatty, and giving this over the top performances, or you have meddled with the very forces of nature, and you will atone, and let me tell you how the world really works. There's no nations, it's just currency, blah blah blah. And then he slowly kind of makes his way over to Howard Beale seated there, and the button line, last line of the scene is I've seen the face of God, and it's like it's a little on the nose, but there's kind of a halo around Beatty's character, and he says, you just may have. And that, of course, we kind of learn that was like just the ego boost that he needed, that he would keep Howard Beale on the air despite the, the fact that his message has become so unpopular, and that it's just tanking the whole network.
And what's so beautiful about that too, so like he starts off at the end of the table and he's well lit, and as he continues on, he walks down the table, and now he's in a lot of shadow. So then he gets revealed again as the face of God.
Yeah.
And it mirrors line for line the moment of Howard laying in bed from the first half of the movie.
Yeah. And I had to think, I was like, okay, he does tell that story on air. So Ned Beatty was using that to kind of manipulate it. But at first I was like, wait, did he just know that inherently? But no, he did. He was very clever in that.
I was having the same thought. I'm like, how does he? Oh, that's right. He told the story on air. So this is just masterful manipulation by Ned Beatty. I captured some audio from this particular scene because there is some good stuff in here. I mean, Ned Beatty earned that nomination for his less than him and Beatrice Straight, both less than 6 minutes of screen time. They both get nominated, and she won. And if it weren't for Jason Robards, Beatty probably would have won for this too. But like this line,
the world is a business, Mr. Beale.
The world is a business. Well, okay, Arthur, it's not. It's not a business. Quit trying to run it like one. But he also, you mentioned this.
There is only IBM and ITT and AT&T and DuPont, Dow, Union Carbide, and Exxon. Those are the nations of the world today.
A few of those are still around. Exxon, not so much. But I love that, and again, like Ned Beatty in that scene, you hear him. He knew right where that line was and how to toe that line, because his breathing in between the different, IBM and ITT, and like he's getting a little more amped up all the time. It was really, really good.
Yeah. And there's always been, I think, a fine line between a salesman and a showman.
For sure.
And I think he mastered that walk, and is why he was so successful. But it's funny too, because like you do mention that the dramatic lighting and how the movie does progress in kind of a subtle fashion. If you're just sitting down and watching it casually, but it does become. It becomes increasingly more theatrical.
Yep.
And to the point where like it's like just an explosion on those sets of color and light and all the the theatrics. But I first noticed too the scene when Diane seduces Max is lit very cool, like because she's kind of leaning up against this lamp, and it has like this kind of she has a very kind of witching charm to her and everything like that. She's talking about how the soothsayer said that she was going to be involved with this curmudgeon. And it's funny too, because I think one of the thing that is apparent in the movie to me, and is I think is articulated well by Lumet himself, is that this movie was very well rehearsed. Like they, Lumet's background is in theater, and so all of these actors, and you don't get that. It's particularly in this day and age, but it's very rare to have that in a movie, and you can tell it's so well rehearsed because all the scenes, the characters are constantly moving. There's always it's always compelling what you're seeing on screen, because these actors have just worked out everything that they're going to do. They're sitting on the desk, they're loosening their tie or whatever, and they're just the blocking of the movie is just really, for my money, just really second to none. And I'm as an audience member, very grateful that they had that opportunity to rehearse and particularly since it's a Paddy Chayefsky screenplay, so there's long diatribes, there's long monologues in there, and it does not always cut away in all those dialogues. So they're just like going off book, well rehearsed, and just really knowing how to move within those scenes. It's it adds so much to the movie.
Yeah, it's great. The blustering and the angry nature, because that whole Ned Beatty, Arthur Jensen rant ramps up, and this made me chuckle, like nearly lose it. Was this, because it's the juxtaposition of how this moment happened.
And you will atone. Am I getting through to you, Mr. Beale?
Yeah.
I'm getting through to you. Like he breaks his character there for a second.
Yeah, and that's the
so
humor too. That there's a scene too where Howard Beale's coming out of the rain. He's late to be on set. Everyone's freaking out, and nobody knows where he is. He's out there wandering around in the rain. He finally wanders into the building, the network building, and a security guard sees him, and he says, "Hey, how are you, Mr. Beale?" He's like, "I'm as mad as a hatter." He's like, "Oh, that's nice. Had a nice show." And initially, Lumet was directing that scene where like the security guard's delivery of like, "Have a nice day, have a great show," or whatever. He had obviously had like a look of like fear and concern and shock to see Howard in this state, kind of wandering off the streets, and that's how he was playing it. And Patty Chayefsky, who was on set at that time, had to pull Sidney Lumet aside, and it's like, no, it's funnier if he's just like, another day at the office, because this is television, and television is a wacky business. So it's just, so there are those like little moments of humor that Lumet, I think, would have missed if Chayefsky wasn't on set to kind of guide him a little bit.
But it's that balance, right? Like the dramatic nature of Sidney's direction, and the well rehearsed and everything, and then the absurdity of the humor mesh so well that it works and it feels more real. It's absolutely absurd, but there's a realistic feel to it. That really
well, because I think they're real ideas. All the characters there have very right or wrong, they all have very solid perspectives, and they articulate those perspectives really, really well. So like there's there's not a lot of stuttering and stammering in all these scenes where it's like an Aaron Sorkin's script or something like that, where it's like it just has that or. And
I think Sorkin even said,
His Girl Friday.
Yeah, I think Sorkin even said like Patty was and this movie in particular was a big influence on him.
I'm not surprised.
It makes perfect sense. Because you have to balance out, like, we need a scene like Max and his wife where you get where Diana, she seduces Max, right? And then they rekindle their affair later.
Yeah, after she fires him. Yeah.
Yeah, she fires him, but then later on at Ruddy's, right after his funeral, they get back together, and then the scene where they go out and they end up back at her place, and it's the one love scene in the movie, is so absurd because she is talking the whole time only about work. And because we had a scene earlier where she says that, where she's like, "I'm terrible because all I care about is my work." Right. It makes that scene so much better because she just talks about it completely, and that's apparently what gets her going.
She wasn't lying. She's an honest, yeah. And then there's that, the fact that when the ratings start to tank, and she's all stressed out on the bed on the phone, and he comes home and they have that big fight, and it's like she's married to her job, so if her job's up, she's up, and if her job's down, she's down, so
and then of course Max has the scene with his wife where he admits to his affair, and that to me really felt like such a good dramatic scene between those two, and I understand why she was nominated and ultimately won an award for that acting, because there's so much going on there in such a short period of time that feels like two actual middle-aged people that have
been through a lot. They have a home, they have a family, a lot of history there, and it ends on that note where she's, like, she warns him, she's like, you're in for a lot of grief with this one. And and he's like, yeah, I know. But yeah, I think in that scene, as well as it is portrayed by William Holden, again, like, though I don't know how I personally would handle that situation, but I feel like he was just really cold to her.
Oh, he was, absolutely.
It was difficult to kind of identify or empathize with him as a hero if in fact he's to be the hero of this story, which again it goes back and forth. You got Howard Beale, you got Diane, you got Max,
and he even has a moment in there where she asks him something, and he's like, I don't even know what to say. Like, I don't even have words to say.
She's telling him she's hurting, she's crying, like, and he's just watching her like stone faced, and then says, what do you got to say?
It's kind of it's a lot worse. Like, it would have been easier on his wife if he had gone fire and brimstone and yelled at her, but he just didn't have that. And you've got I also loved this one last one from Ned Beatty I want to play, because this was, once again, this movie kind of giving us a look into the future.
All necessities provided, all anxieties tranquilized, all boredom amused.
All boredom amused.
Yeah.
And earlier, Howard, one of his rants was talking about how their television is all about,
we're in the boredom killing business.
The boredom killing business. Like, that's what they do. It was so both very on the nose, but also just very well written. And to do this in the mid 70s too, and where we've come to at this point. Yeah. It's pretty interesting.
I think unfortunately, Patty Chayefsky has died, but if there's ever, I'm not a big fan of sequels, but I feel like, if there were ever to be a sequel, to address the fact that we're now kind of living in a post-television world, with social media and the internet and everything. And it's one of the more interesting aspects of the film is that it does kind of document this transition between, as you mentioned, the old guard and the kind of responsibility of that journalists felt to the integrity of their reporting into a more a responsibility towards news ratings and shareholders and that kind of corporate takeover. And it seems like we're kind of entering a new age of responsibilities, going from the news obsession or ratings obsession of television to the kind of clickbait obsession of internet journalism or what have you. You know? So it'd be interesting to just see but again too, like the power is different too. That power dynamic of having 60 million households, and if something goes viral, you get much bigger numbers, but it's not as in the home as it were as a TV would be. It's not really, that doesn't have that oomph.
I would be fascinated to see not a remake of Network, because we don't need to tell these stories again, but the themes, though. The conceptual parts of Network, the themes of it, to see that done in today's landscape would be
it'd be very
really
ambitious.
fascinating. It'd be very ambitious. I think also just getting this back out in front of people, this particular movie, to show like, hey, 50 years ago we were talking about this, and look where we are now. Like, yeah, it's a different landscape, but it makes a lot of really great points.
And sometimes I'm kind of surprised. Well, I'm not surprised, but I am pleased that the movie still has this shelf life, because I feel like at the time, even though it got supported by the Academy, and that's fantastic, but I can't like really. It's clear to me that they had no idea how to market this movie upon its release. I don't know how it did at the box office, but I've never seen poster art for it that was like at all compelling. I mean, there's the what's probably most common is it's Howard Beale on his news set with the stained glass behind him.
Yep.
That's a common marketing image. And then the official movie poster itself is like it's an ugly cartoon, black and white cartoon with like tacky, modern font at the time, modern quotes there, and it's just, it does not sell the picture or any of the ideas in it. So if there's anyone that's watching or listening at home, like if you guys can design a kick butt T-shirt for a network, I will buy it and I will gladly wear it. But it's like it was a really tough movie for the marketing departments to kind of move and push out there. But
it is, right? Because like this movie or All the President's Men or 12 Angry Men, like 12 Angry Men, you can kind of get away with just showing the jury room. But like All the President's Men, these movies like this and All the President's Men, where it's just a lot of people talking throughout the movie, but not expositionally talking, which is a thing that this movie did that I really, really liked. Was we didn't have people just spouting exposition and explaining to us the ins and outs of television.
We did have the voiceover, but so we wouldn't necessarily need that. Yeah.
But the voiceover is as much as you get, and it even is giving us exposition, but it's more of like, hey, here's this dude, he does this thing. There you go. Like, but the characters within the movie never feel like characters in a movie. They feel like they live in this world. So when they're having their conversations and they're talking about whatever's going on, they're not talking in a way where it's like you and I are outsiders and we need to understand. They're just having the conversation. Right. It's very similar to like
they're being honest.
David Mamet does that really well, right? He writes dialogue. Sorkin is also real good at that, where it's conversations that people have that you you don't need to know the ins and outs of television production to be able to follow the events of this movie easily.
No,
it's very, very clear what's going on. So I really appreciated that.
Yeah, it's funny that like Patty at one point told Cindy that like about those booth scenes and those behind the scenes of the news programming. He's like, the audience doesn't need to understand what these technicians are saying to each other. They just need to understand that the technicians know what they're saying to each other. You know,
exactly.
That they have that realism there.
I also loved like, there's wonderful satire in there of Diana. At one point, she is having a conversation about getting the Ecumenical Liberation Organization, whatever, their own show, right? And she even says,
she can have it. I don't give a damn about the political content.
She doesn't care one way or the other what the content of the show is, as long as people watch it.
Now, do you think that's because she sees their efforts as being futile, or is that because she is concerned only with the ratings? Or like it's interesting because there's different ways you can kind of look at her attitude in that sense.
There are, but when she has this line earlier in the movie,
all I want out of life is a 30 share and a 20 rating.
That's all
that spells it out pretty clearly.
All she cares about is butts in the seats, eyes on the screen. Doesn't matter what's being shown as long as it's getting the attention. Because that's and that it's the thing she has created that's getting the attention. That's all that she cares about. And
I think if you recall, her moment to kind of shine at that shareholders meeting,
yep,
where they give her the big round of applause, and she's rooting on the crowd. Like, you can tell that, like, that's why she wakes up in the morning, is to have that adoration.
Yep.
Like, she's a star, even though she's behind the cameras and everything.
Yeah, and so she'll tell anyone anything. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as that gets her that goal.
Yeah.
As long as it serves that purpose, she doesn't care what it is, what the message is, which is really interesting too. Then when they start that new show, and then later on we get all the lawyers sitting in that rundown house with King, whatever his name is, not
Ahmad something.
Ahmad, which, by the way, I loved the behind the scenes thing of the actor that played him was vegetarian. And so,
and he's got that fried chicken scene.
Yeah, there's a scene where he's supposed to be just mowing down on fried chicken. So apparently, because today all you do is give him some vegan chicken, right? You dress up something and you just eat that. But they didn't have that back then to really use. They certainly weren't going to have anything that looked right. So he just apparently just stuffed his cheeks with like paper towel to make it look like they were full, and smeared some grease on his face. And that was the way they got around it. I just thought that was clever. Like, that's old school filmmaking of how can we fake this? So I did dig that. But when they have that meeting, and here is, the Communist Party and the Ecumenical Liberation Organization or Army, it was either ELO or ELA, I don't remember, but arguing over who's going to get what share of the money from things, and like they're yelling at each other and screaming at each other about like percentages of the money from the royalties and the sale of all of this stuff. And it's just like,
which is exactly what Jensen told them that they'd be doing.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like money just changed all of it, and I love that. So like, there's just so much in this movie that makes me want to watch it again too, to see what other things I can pick up on that I didn't get the first watch. But man, there's some great stuff in here. And we haven't even talked a ton about Robert Duvall. Robert Duvall is so good in this. Everybody is on point. But Duvall, one of my notes on him was like, man, Robert Duvall was one of the great yellers, right?
Yes.
Like,
he's got that, I think it's funny too, because Lumet, they were leaning on him, I suspect, in the casting department to put in an East Coaster that was, maybe a little bit sophisticated and kind of having that kind of Ivy League stock. And Sidney Lumet, coming from television, knew firsthand that a lot of TV executives were these Midwestern types that were just like, a lot of chutzpah, because it's a tough business to, break into and be successful at. So,
and yelling is not easy. People can kind of think it is, but like doing what Peter Finch did in this movie with his character of Howard, or what Duvall does. I mean, Duvall for me is up there, maybe a half a step below, like your Gene Hackmans and Samuel L. Jacksons, right? They are the kings of yelling. I have always contended, I don't think they were ever in a movie together or had any scenes together. But if you put Gene Hackman and Sam Jackson in a movie where they had to yell at each other, I don't know that we could have. I don't know if we could have took that. Like, I don't think we were prepared for it. But and
it's tough with like actors like that. With the loud actors, you're probably not going to get more than 3 takes.
Yeah.
So, you as a director, you really have to have, that rehearsal time and that, that setup.
Yeah. And in fact, the famous,
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
That scene, they got 1.5 takes of, because halfway through the second take, he had to stop. He was just getting worn out from it. And so they used part of that second take and the second half of the first take and went for it. And it just worked. Like, it was just great.
Yeah. And I think too, to get back on Duvall, is that like, there are, I think across the board, he just did a really phenomenal job. And I think one of the more, a scene that sticks out in my head is when he's, when he's getting the news that Howard is throwing a hand grenade in this deal with the Arab investors, and he's just watching his and he's just rubbing his bald head, like you could tell that he just like all his hair he's literally losing his hair as we speak from stress, and you do kind of feel a bit of sympathy for him, that you had like, oh, he's in such a tough spot,
You do, and then you realize, oh, but he's also awful. And so all that sympathy then goes right out the window, because he's just like, this character just cares about money. And that's his whole purpose for being there, is to make them more money. And it's great. But man, he has a couple of great lines. Like, I love early on, the first time Howard has his meltdown, and they're getting all the calls and all the letters and telegrams and all that. And he's yelling at Max, and he's got this other guy, Herb, in the room. And just this.
Go down to the mail room. As of this minute, over 14,000 telegrams. The response is sensational. Herb telling. Herb's phone hasn't stopped ringing.
That is so great, because that happens.
It's like a Marx Brothers, like, just the quick cutoff and everything. Yeah.
Yep. The Herb tell him, and then the second the guy opens his mouth, and he just cuts him right off and keeps going. And he keeps yelling at him, and he's like,
I got a hit, Schumacher, and Ruddy doesn't count anymore.
Like, it's just, it's so good. So good.
Yeah.
And also, again, this one was just very prescient when Max is threatening to leave, and he's like, I'll take everybody with me, right? I'll leave, and I'll take all my news people with me. And
think they're gonna quit their jobs for you? Not in this recession, buddy.
Yeah.
Oof.
I have to ask, though, off the top of my head, I don't know if it was this pre or post Godfather. 76.
Sort of in post the first Godfather.
Okay. And it would then, and then I'm just trying to think in relation to like his star caliber at the time. I mean, it's post-apocalyptic or apocalypse now. That was what, 79 or?
That was somewhere in this same era. So he was on the rise. He was known. He had been doing, westerns and stuff like that prior.
Right, of course, and he's Boo Radley in To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah. So like he was known, but he hadn't, and so there was a great get. So I always like to do this too in a movie, especially a movie this old, is whenever money is brought up. I didn't do it for all of the money being mentioned, but at one point, Hackett mentions that because of the deal with Saudi Arabia, the Saudis, is falling through, but the corporation that owns the network owes those has like $2 billion in loans.
That's right.
Billion with a B in the 1970s. So I had to do a little number checking on that, and just inflation difference alone in today's money, that is $12 billion. $12 billion, almost $12 billion that they basically owed. That's an insane amount of money. Like, what were these people doing? But and then to have the scene. So then we've got again, Howard is throwing the hand grenade on all the plans and all that, and they go to Jensen, but off screen. Hackett goes to him and comes out, and he's like, all right,
all defeated.
Jensen said, we keep him on the air. He likes him. He's feeding he's doing what he wants. And so you've got Hackett and Diana, and from the early on in the movie, what was his name? Nelson Chaney, who was like the head of the things, who he was one of the old guard who didn't want to make changes.
Yes. Yeah.
And now at the end of the movie, he's sitting in, he's still there. He hasn't gone anywhere. And they're all sitting in this room realizing that Jensen won't let them take Howard off the air. They all want Howard off the air because it's going to torpedo the whole network. Jensen won't let them do it because Jensen is also
an ego.
Yeah, he's got a huge ego and is mad as a hatter and wants him on the air. And so they're all sitting around discussing the fact that they're going to have to kill Howard.
Mm-hmm.
And and I did like the one guy's like, you don't have any recording devices in here, do you? Like, because this is,
And he doesn't answer him.
he doesn't answer him, but this is also like just post Watergate. Like Watergate is still very much a thing at this point. And so they're discussing this, and they decide, without actually telling us as an audience, they're going to do it. And we get the last broadcast of Howard.
Well, Diane has the best. I mean, she's an evil genius.
Yeah,
she's like, well, we're entering sweeps weeks, or
right.
This could be a great season finale. We're gonna do a tie-in. We're gonna do a cross promotional. And it's just like, oh, diabolical, but beautiful.
Absolutely genius and diabolical. Like Diane is just terrible. But they get what is it? Great Ahmad Khan and some random dude. We see them both coming into the studio audience, which, by the way, I love the fact that they take "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore" as a rallying cry to literally a catchphrase for this.
So corny.
This whole thing.
Yeah.
So corny.
Yeah.
But Howard gets out there, starts up the show, and those two dudes stand up and shoot him, and we get the final line of the movie. You mentioned it earlier. This movie had already been fantastic, and if you had just ended it here, it would have been great. This was just the chef's kiss.
Chef's kiss. Yeah.
For our final voiceover.
This was the story of Howard Beale, the first known instance of a man who was killed because he had lousy ratings.
So good.
And you have to think that like he started with that line. That was like it's such a poignant and beautiful joke that he's just like,
that's the napkin. That's written on the bar napkin.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I've got this idea, writes that down, and then builds a story out of it. Like it's so good.
Yeah.
This was a great movie to watch. I'm so glad I got to watch it and get to discuss this. This is one more people need to see Network. You really do.
Yeah.
Like,
absolutely.
It's at times tough to watch because it's a little too realistic, but
it's dated in some of the sexual politics or whatever.
Absolutely. But, I mean, the fact that that Faye Dunaway and William Holden, there's an age difference of like almost 25 years between them.
Yeah.
So I was a little like, but then, she initiates all of it. It's all her idea. She has full agency, which is nice. So it wasn't like it wasn't seedy in that way, but it's still like, but he was 25 when she was born. That's just icky.
Right.
But get around some of the datedness of like, it is a 1970s film, but what it's telling you is very important. And I think very prescient. And more so today, even than it was then. And it's one that you can interpret in a lot of different ways, but it really comes down to it's about media manipulation at its core.
Yeah.
It's about how the dissemination of information went from an institution that was like, here's what's going on, to and just telling you what is happening, to telling you how you should feel about what is happening, and tapping into
about being media manipulation and the effects that can have on the general populace, and the sensationalism, I think, and I think those are such big themes that it does kind of get lost. Howard Beale's kind of, these different epiphanies that he has, throughout his kind of his wayward journey. I think he does. I think he gets a little bit more philosophical with some of his speeches there. About truth and purpose. And that being said, though, it's like, I think I want to say it was right around this time too that Noam Chomsky's "The Message is the Medium," or that may not be but it's a famous work of media criticism was starting to emerge, I think, in the 70s, particularly in academia, because that's when, you started having media studies become a viable major for people. And so there's a lot of, and by that time, there'd been enough research accrued on the psychology of mass media and everything like that. But, and that's one thing too, when, that iconic line, I'm as mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. That when I saw that in my adolescence, it was invigorating and I totally got it and I was all on board. And seeing it recently, it was a little bit frightening to see those people just kind of stick their heads out and be like, it's like, oh, you kicked a hornet's nest and you don't know what the repercussions are going to be just yet. Thankfully, it was kind of contained in this, this audience sector. But, if you look at more recent movies like Joker or Joker 2, where you have this same kind of like sensationalism that's sparking political radical movements, it's in the context of the movies.
It'd be really, really interesting if you did something modernized with these concepts, how you would branch that out beyond just the bubble of like the television people involved in making it. Like how far out would that sphere of influence go? So it's really, really incredible. And honestly, just to watch this movie for a master class in directing a film, in blocking and staging shots, and in acting, like pound for pound, the acting in this movie is some of the best I've ever seen.
Yeah, and it's we're thankful for that, because the fact that everyone got on board with what this movie was and understood it and understood their roles so well and was able to just be firing on all cylinders and really delivering it. It's just rare talent there, because it'd be so easy to cast someone that's just kind of missing the mark. Like, what is this? Is this a comedy? Is it a drama? What's happening here? When I was watching it too, I was like, what were they telling those extras? Like in the when they're sticking their heads out the window, or when they're in the studio audience, or when it's like, what was the direction that these extras were getting? Because I can't imagine like not knowing anything about the movie, but just showing up to set and being like, I'm as mad as hell. What is this movie?
Right. Exactly. Also, one last thing that I thought was fascinating is Faye Dunaway is nominated. Faye Dunaway, Peter Finch, William Holden, all nominated, along with Beatrice Straight. And Faye Dunaway and Peter Finch have no scenes together. Even though Diana talks about Howard a lot.
Obsesses over him, yeah.
We never have a single scene involving the two of them at the same time.
That is interesting.
And Beatrice Straight and Faye Dunaway have no scenes together, because Beatrice Straight only has 2 scenes. In fact,
I think that kind of speaks to her character's isolation too.
Yeah.
That she, Faye's she is in her apartment, very lonely, and when Max leaves her, she's, please don't go. And he kind of, this is a preview for next week's episode. He shuts the door and it's an empty apartment. And, that's her life.
So it's pretty incredible to have these performances and to have so many of them that don't interact with each other.
Yeah,
I don't think.
Yeah, it is interesting.
I don't think Robert Duvall has any scenes. I don't think Hackett has a scene with Beale either.
No, they're totally detached from Howard Beale and what the show actually is, and what they, because again, to your point, like, they don't care.
Yeah,
and so it's like, oh wow, they're not even interacting with this lunatic. That's
it's just really incredible. This is just a master class in so many different things. Did you get a chance to check this movie out? This was a great one, and I'm so glad I finally was able to check that off the list. I've seen Network now. Now I get it.
There you go.
I get it. Right. I know what it was. So thank you.
Well, I'm honored to be the first guy to kind of pick your brain about it too, because you got that fresh perspective. And,
This has been great. So thank you so much for coming on, for talking with me about it, and sharing this movie with me and with all of us. You got anything you're working on? You want to tell people about?
Folks can follow me on X at jpitchforth, one word. My screen name is Houdini Khan, and I post about movies. I'm a filmmaker myself,
Okay.
so I've got about 3 movies in post-production and currently in mid-production of a new sword and sorcery picture called St. George and the Dragon.
Excellent.
And so if you follow me on X, I'll be updating folks about all the releases that we're hoping to have in the coming year here. So
excellent. Definitely check that out. J. Pitchforth.
Yes, like to pitch forth something.
Yes. Not Pitchford. I got that one wrong. Pitchforth.
That's right.
Jay Pitchford is going to be somebody else on there. You don't want that.
That's right. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, this show I record live every Sunday night, 8 p.m. Eastern time, right here, twitch.tv/tvstravis or on youtube.com/@tvstravis. So if you want to be like a Stigma or that one weirdo and hang out in the chat and chat with us while we're recording it, you can do that. The show comes out as a podcast every Wednesday, wherever you get your podcasts, including a video version at YouTube. A follow on YouTube is greatly appreciated as I try to keep growing that channel. But listening to it in your podcatcher of choice, always welcome. If you want to help the show grow in a financial sense, you can also do that through Patreon. My patrons at patreon.com/WYHS are the lifeblood of the show. They let me do things like my upcoming live live episode of the show I will be doing in Las Vegas.
Cool. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. I've got a great movie lined up for it. That'll be at the end of April. I'll be going back to Dragon Con this year. And that is
very cool.
Also because of patrons that I'm able to do things like that. As a patron, you get access to special spots on the Discord. I do have patron-only series called My First Watch Diaries, where I'm going through different series of shows and talking about each episode for 10 or 15 minutes. Right now, I'm halfway through Ahsoka from Star Wars. I hadn't watched that one yet, so I'm checking that out. So if you want my thoughts on stuff like that, the previous series I did was Fall of the House of Usher. From Netflix.
Oh,
so
yeah, that's
fantastic.
I'd be curious to see what you. Yeah, that's very cool.
So that's definitely that's all stuff that patrons get. So if you can do that, that's great, and I very much appreciate that. Patreon.com/WYHS. You can also find the links for that at my website, tvstravis.com. It's got links for everything, all the social media platforms I'm on, which is basically TV's Travis everywhere. The upcoming stuff, I'm really looking forward to this live episode in Vegas. I did it last year. It was a lot of fun. So I'm really excited to do that.
You said that was in April?
Yep, end of April. I'll be out in Las Vegas for a week, and while I'm there, I'll be doing the show live in the Canyon Room at the Plaza Hotel in downtown Las Vegas.
Now, are you going to announce beforehand what movie it is, or is it going to be a surprise?
No, I'll talk about it ahead of time. I can talk about it now because I have booked that one. My co-host from Those Were the Days is going to be in Vegas with me, and we are going to talk about. He has never seen the movie Smokin' Aces, and I adore that movie. So we're going to talk about that one.
Very cool.
I like to expose Stephen to new stuff. Oh, so stylized. And the cast, I can't wait to hear his thoughts on this cast because I'm just excited. So that's going to be in Las Vegas this year.
Nice.
So yeah, that'll be a lot of fun. But until then, Josiah, thank you so much for being here this week. This has been a lot of fun. We'll have to do this again. And we were supposed to have another friend, a mutual friend of ours, Josh, and friend of the show. But he was feeling a little under the weather. Josh. Yes, get well soon. But we'll have him back for sure because he's always welcome back, and you as well. You're welcome back anytime. We'll get you both back on. It'll be wonderful.
Thank you.
So until next time, just remember to enjoy your movies, everybody. Take your news with a grain of salt and be excellent to each other. This has been Wait You Haven't Seen.
It's a big, fat, big-titted hit, and I don't have to waffle around with Ruddy anymore.
I could not.
Nice.
I had to have some Duvall yelling right at the end there.
Post-credit scene, man. It's brilliant.
Hell yeah.
I love it. Yeah.